Hi everybody, and welcome to week 3 where we're going to be talking about socioeconomic status, or SES. I'm excited for us to dig into the topic this week and to be really thinking about what's the relationship between the arts therapies and socioeconomic status. And we have Rachel H. and Sarah who are going to be leading us through our work this week as the two lead bloggers. So it'll be the first time that we have two lead bloggers. Just as a reminder for folks, when we have two lead bloggers, the way that works is both Rachel and Sarah separately will create their own synthesis, criticism, conversation for themselves, for the class, with regards to the required readings, and they will each independently ask at least one question to you as the class. You must respond to both Rachel and to Sarah, and then you must respond to one comment from one of your classmates on either threads. But feel free to do more than that because it helps the conversation really grow and be healthy. So you will have to answer 2 times in the weeks where there are 2 bloggers. So make sure that you leave enough time for yourself to be able to do that. So a couple of other things in terms of assignments, and then I'll dig into a little bit about the topic and the required readings for this week. The first one is I've put on there a reminder about your cultural analysis video. So this is where you are creating a video with a small group on either a film or a TV show or a book, which I don't think any of you are doing unless you're really going to surprise me. That's not due until week 5. However, I'm reminding you now in week 3 to do this. And really, I would encourage you, if you haven't already, to ensure that by this week, by week 3, that you have made a plan for how you're going to access and view whatever movie or TV show you're planning to review, and that you've made a plan with your group members around how you're going to get the work done. The time will go quickly when you're in the online setting, and I want to make sure that you're planning yourself out. The other thing that I really highly recommend that you do is you build in more technical time than you think you're going to need in order to create the video, put it together, and put it up. Every year there's always some form of technological problem where people have a hard time navigating through VoiceThread if they haven't used it before, or a video takes much longer to upload than they expect, and that can cause some last minute stress. So don't do that to yourself. Please make sure that you give yourself a lot of time built in, some buffer time to be able to create this piece together and the art making together. The assignment that is due this week is going to be your second resistance journal. So just as a reminder, even though we talked about this when we were together during residency, and this is also written in the syllabus, you're not picking a new resistance. You're still working with the previous resistance from your first journal, with 1 or 2 exceptions where we've discussed you potentially changing it based on things that were arising. But for everybody else, please use your same resistance journal topic and same resistance topic. And what you're going to be doing is really updating me and you around where are you now with this resistance. So you had to, at the end of residency, identify 4 strategies that you were going to try to implement. Which strategies have you tried? And when you've tried them, how have they gone? Did it make the resistance stronger? Did it make it weaker? What kind of emotions arose? What happened in your body? Which of your strategies have you not tried, and why? Why do they scare you, or why have you avoided them, or why are they not practical? Why have you tried something else instead? Or if you waited until the very last moment, so 48 hours before this was due, to try out a strategy, what's up with that? So I encourage you to really be honest in this second resistance journal, as I encourage you to do the first time around, to really be truthful to myself and to you around where you're at. You don't need to show sort of a magical progression. Really articulate where you're at with this kind of work. And if you haven't already, I did send very individualized feedback and lengthy feedback to every person's original resistance journal. I'd recommend, even if you read it back then, that you reread your first resistance journal and you also read my feedback. There may be questions that I asked you there that you could spend some time answering in your second resistance journal. All the details for exactly what you need to do in the second resistance journal are included in your syllabus, so feel free to take a look there. And if any of my feedback pissed you off or didn't feel like it resonated or you weren't really sure what I meant, unpack it. So use this time to be in dialogue with me and with yourself about what it's like to get some feedback from another person. So the topic we're going to be diving into this week is really looking at socioeconomic status. So as you hopefully remember, socioeconomic status is not just talking about how much money do you have in your bank account right now, which is a misnomer. It's a thing that people often think about when they hear the word class. or socioeconomic status. But actually, there's a whole confluence of different pieces that are tied to this that are more than just about the amount of money that you have. This may include some things like social capital. So, for example, do you have access to a network of people who are closer to power and or money? So you may not have money yourself, but if you come from a middle or upper class family, you may have access to networks of people, either that are your own age or perhaps your family members' ages, that help you have access to things like job interviews, bank account, loans, somebody who could co-sign a mortgage for you, somebody that could bail you out. Do you have a safety net? Is there somebody in your life who might be able to provide financial assistance or emotional assistance should something happen to you in a fairly major way or to your family? SES can also be connected to education. It can be connected to cultural norms, ways of speaking, ways of doing things, how to operate within particular high class setting type events. So do you feel comfortable, for example, at a fundraiser or at a gala, or is that something that feels very foreign to you? And you can also think about here too around some of the ways in which people who have old money versus new money see one another, and how that might be connected to more than just money, but also around values. So two families, for example, could have the same amount in their bank account, but having come to that money in very different ways. And what's that connected to in terms of power, in terms of assumptions, in terms of the way in which somebody sees the world or entitlement? How have they been raised in relationship to money and power is really what socioeconomic status is about. And I've included for you a very quick quiz in the required reading that asks you to sort of do a self-assessment of class. It's not a perfect one, but it is one that gets at more things than just money, to give you some other examples and ideas about that. You'll notice when you look at the required readings that there aren't any creative arts therapy articles or chapters for you to read this week. And it's actually the only week where I'm not having you read any by an art therapist, music therapist, dance movement, expressive art, or drama therapist. And it's because there's almost none that have been written and focused on this issue in the CATS field. So there's a very old article, 35 years old, that was published in Arts and Psychotherapy by an author named Ciranari in 1983. And with the exception of that, it's quite rare for people to sort of critically engage with this topic. It's common that, for example, arts therapists will talk about working with impoverished youth or talk about working with underserved communities, which is kind of code for sometimes race and sometimes class, sometimes both. But it's rare that this is kind of the focus of the work, and not a lot has been written on the topic. And I ran several years ago now the North American Drama Therapy Association's annual conference, which was focused on issues of social justice. And we included in our call for papers for presentations, not only intersectional identities, but also race, gender, sexual orientation, etc. And we included explicitly for people to talk about socioeconomic status or class. And I think it's telling that in the hundreds of proposals we received, not a single one focused on the issue of socioeconomic status or class. So you start to see in the literature that class is something that becomes quite a taboo subject, becomes kind of ghostly. It's not fully discussed. It might be hinted at or pointed to, but it's not something that we've really given a lot of critical attention to in our field in particular. And you may remember this from the little lecture that I did on neoliberalism, that neoliberalism operates much in the same way. So it's kind of like, I'm from Bermuda, so this metaphor makes sense to me. It might not to all of you, but it's like getting caught with an undercurrent or a tow when you're in the ocean, an undertow, that you're out and something's kind of slowly pulling you further and further away from shore, but you aren't really aware that it's happening because it's happening quite slowly, and you don't feel a violent tug. All of a sudden, when you look up, you realize how far away from the beach you've actually become. And socioeconomic status is kind of like that. You don't realize that how powerful sort of financial connected to cultural values and power forces are until you end up in quite a sticky situation. And this often happens for therapists working with clients as well, depending on your class sort of background and also the class background of those with whom you're serving, which don't always match up in terms of the sort of typical model of expert as having more power, or therapist as having more power and client as not. Sometimes those are quite reverse. We know many creative arts therapists have huge student loans, so they may have grown up and have more class background, but may be financially struggling when they exit their program. Hopefully that didn't scare a whole bunch of you, but it's the truth. So in the two of the pieces, the Zandy and the Rothman pieces, you'll see both of them talking about some of these ghostly threads and the sort of disappearing act of class issues. So I'd invite those who are the lead bloggers, and also when you're doing your own blogging and reading, to be considering, why do you think this is the case? And why might this be the case specifically within the creative arts therapies? So the Zandy piece, Zandy's a literature prof, and so while this isn't a creative arts therapist, Zandy does talk a lot about the use of story and which kinds of people are left in history and left out of history, which kind of stories become prominent, which get told, and which have to go underground. So this work really includes some information, I think, about the power that's associated with histories and what would happen if a kind of labor movement history and stories were more front and center, or working class. In addition, there's some interesting pieces here for creative arts therapists in terms of thinking about the impact of sort of manual labor and or the physical stress and emotional stress that comes from being lower class in terms of putting the body at risk. And this is connected to some of the writing and work of Bawal, who talks about how we carry oppression in our bodies, or some of the trauma work that really looks at the impact of both physical and emotional stress on the body. Rothman's piece, Rothman used to, and I think still does, teach at Lesley, and writes a good deal about the self as instrument. What I love about this article is that Rothman is quite critical of intersectionality, which is the main theoretical framework we've been using together. But they point out, I think in a really important way, that there are some risks of using intersectionality. So Rothman talks about how if we're always looking at a multiplicity of things, or how many different kinds of oppressions are interlocked together, sometimes we might sacrifice depth of understanding for breadth. And that we may lose something in not being able to focus on particular issues. In this case, they're really talking about class. In addition, Rothman points out what kind of language doesn't exist for class and how that determines how the conversation works. So we talked a good amount during residency about the power of language and phrases to sort of embed particular conversations and values, but we didn't talk so much about which kind of language is missing, and I think this is an important one. And last, Rothman's article helps us think about, as clinicians, how class values may be pathologized. So how lower class or working class families may be pathologized as chaotic or as neglectful to their children, instead of actually families working to make things work. So take a good look at the article for some of those pieces. And the video that I've included is a lecture by Dr. Roy where she flips the script intentionally on the idea of entitlements and of welfare, from being towards those who are poorest in the United States, and instead looking at the kinds of entitlements that those who are wealthy, including corporations and very rich individuals, what they receive. And so she provides, I think, a nice sort of historical background in terms of some of these issues and policies. She talks about the rise of a completely created imaginary image called the welfare queen under Reagan. And the thing that I think is really interesting about this lecture is it's not only sort of a typical academic lecture, but she has partnered with a group that believe in making lectures about poverty and globalization more accessible. And so she partners with an art group that have created, you'll see what I mean when you watch this, some really stunning visual art pieces that don't just sort of one-for-one portray some of the pieces that Roy is trying to get across, but actually produce some new ideas as well. So it might be interesting for you to think about, what do the images convey versus the sort of what's coming in your ears, what do they convey? What are the consequences? What would it be like to just hear this lecture on its own? Would it be like to only see this lecture without hearing it? And then what is it like integrated? And some of you could even experiment with that for part of your blogging. It's a short enough video that you could certainly do that and sort of see what is the use of the arts in sort of tackling some of these issues. There's also some additional resources, so I've included the Sue and Sue chapter there for people to take a look at. These are sort of recommended readings, APA's sort of statement on poverty, and a couple of others if you're interested to take a look. But I'd really invite you to dig into what is often a taboo subject in the United States and in much of the world, which is talking about the fixity of class. There's an idea in the United States, a myth of meritocracy, that no class systems exist and that anybody can make it if you simply work hard enough. And we know that that's really not true. And socioeconomic status outside of just money, but really thinking about values and access to power is one way for us to sort of unpack that myth. So I hope you enjoy the work this week, and I look forward very much to what Rachel H. and Sarah will lead us through in terms of the discussion. And as always, please feel free to reach out if you have any questions or concerns. I'm happy to be in touch. I hope you have a good week, and we'll see you in the blog space soon.